The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
On behalf of RBCS, welcome to this webinar on case studies in free test tool success. I am Rex Black, president of RBCS, a worldwide testing and quality assurance firm serving clients ranging from small startups to Fortune 20 global enterprises. Since 1994, oops, sorry about that, microphone readjustment there. Since 1994, RBCS has delivered insight and confidence to hundreds of clients around the world. Our team of international consultants deliver customized training, consulting, and outsourcing services for companies that are looking to improve their test and quality assurance practices. I am the author of 12 books on software testing, including the bestseller Managing the Testing Process and 4 books on the ISTQB program. Attendance at today's webinar earns PMI PDUs. I would like to thank Rex Price for reviewing the materials for PDU status and making valuable suggestions. Attendees will receive an email telling them how to claim PDUs, including the PDU code. PDUs are available for live webinar attendance only. Before we start the presentation, a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have any questions during the course of the webinar, please feel free to submit them throughout the presentation via your webinar interface, but please note they're answered only at the end. There is no need to ask for presentation copies. The presentation is on the web at rbcs-us.com. Go to the Resources tab in the upper middle and navigate from there to the Basic Library. By attending this webinar, you have automatically been registered for the free e-learning drawing. Check your email over the next couple days and watch the spam filter. I hope you enjoyed this free webinar from RBCS. We do these free webinars as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS, we are a not just for profit company. All right, so today we're going to talk about successful use of free test tools. So tools can be very helpful, but sometimes they can be very expensive. It is not unusual for me as a consultant to hear stories of multi-million-dollar investments in tools, tool licenses and support and so forth. And that's something that some companies can afford, and some companies do that and get a positive return on investment, but a lot of companies don't get a positive return on investment. And so you might think, well, why don't we just skip the cost of the tool licenses and go for the free tools? You've probably heard a lot about free tools or have started hearing about free tools. There's certainly been an explosion in the availability of those over the last decade or so. Some of it driven by the Agile community, but a lot of it just the nature of open source development. That the success of Linux spawned a whole bunch of other similar projects that some of which are focused on testing tools. So you might say, okay, well, that's cool, and now I can get the tool for free. But the thing is that when I talk about multi-million-dollar investments in automation and test tools, I'm not just talking about the licenses, because your time is valuable too, and time you spend on a tool is time you don't spend doing other things. So if the tool doesn't work out for you, then you're basically distracting yourself from your real work, and that can be suboptimal at best, and in some cases actually counterproductive. So it's important to know what works and what doesn't work. Now, I did a presentation last week on how to determine your requirements and select a tool based on your requirements. So it's important that you not skip that step. Even if you're talking about using a free tool, you still need to make sure that you understand what specifically you're trying to do with it. Otherwise, you could inadvertently end up metaphorically driving screws with a hammer. So I'm not going to go through and mention these tools with an intention of saying Oh, skip all that hard stuff that I talked about last week with respect to requirements and just run out and grab the tool that Rex mentioned as a successful tool. No, you still need to um, identify your requirements. But this presentation is here more just to give you an expanded awareness of what you might be able to accomplish using free tools, and also some things to look out for. Okay, so let's start with the elephant in the room, as the cliche goes. A lot of times when people are talking about test automation, what they are talking about is automating tests at the graphical user interface, replacing expensive tools like Quick Test Pro or whatever they're calling it now, or Rational Functional Tester, other similar types of tools. So a lot of those GUI automation tools, the commercial ones, are very expensive, but there are open source options. Now, what we find with our clients when we're doing training and consulting work with them is that you ask people, are you doing graphical user interface test automation using an open source tool? And they say yes. More often than not, if you ask them which tool it is, they'll say it's Selenium. And there's a funny story about the origin of the name Selenium. I could never figure out exactly what the source of that was, but apparently back when the Mercury toolset was still owned by Mercury, not HB, some people got cheesed off with Mercury's aggressive sales tactics and high prices, and so they went to create a open source alternative, and they called it Selenium because selenium as a substance, a chemical, is apparently the cure for mercury poisoning. Sorry about the helicopter noise there. Now, the thing with using Selenium or any other open source test automation, GUI test automation tool is you still have to apply best practices in terms of the creation of maintainable tests. And so, make sure that you're doing proper keyword-driven architecture, and you've got that in place right from the start. If you don't do that, if you just go, well, the tool is free and so it's not costing us that much. Again, remember your time is valuable, and you don't want to build a test automation system and have to throw it away. And there's a lot of ways that this can happen, and I've certainly said this a number of times before in other webinars. It is really important, if you decide that you're going to build a graphical user interface automated test system, that you have somebody in charge of that from the technical side who has at least 5 years of experience. And I'm talking about 5 years of experience building graphical user interface automated tests. Now, this 5 years of experience rule, this comes from what's called the 10,000 hour rule, which was popularized by Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers, which basically he didn't come up with that. That rule was actually devised, I guess you'd say, codified, discovered by some psychologists who did some studies and found that for any intellectually complex task, it takes about 10,000 hours to master it. What Gladwell did was he found a number of examples of that rule in action, ranging from the Beatles to Bill Joy to Bill Gates. So don't make the mistake that I've seen a number of our clients make, which is they go, well, the tool is free and we'll just hire some sharp programmers straight out of college and throw them at the problem, and they'll probably be able to solve it. I've used college interns and recent college grads as test toolsmiths a lot, and I've been very happy with what they've been able to accomplish. But when you're talking about a large, complex GUI test automation system, you're going to need people with experience. Now, how about performance testing? Performance testing is another place where people spend a lot of money, and justly so. I mean, as if you're in business on the internet and you have performance problems, you have a real problem. Excuse me, a little sip of coffee there. There are horror stories that abound about companies that did great damage to their business prospects due to problems with performance or its cousin, reliability. But the thing is that a lot of companies take one look at what it's going to cost them to get virtual user licenses or use a testing as a service provider to load test their system and say, whoa, man, this is, we can't afford that. If you can't afford it, you can't afford it no matter how much you need it, right? So what alternatives exist for companies that desperately need to do performance testing but simply can't carve out the large amount of money that would be necessary to do it? So more often than not, when we are talking to clients about open source performance testing tools that are being used, the tool that we hear is JMeter. JMeter seems to be the one that people are happiest with, or at least have landed on and stayed on. Some of this has to do with just momentum. Once a certain critical mass of people are out there talking about a particular tool and so forth, it kind of becomes the incumbent, and JMeter seems to be in that position. Less frequently, we hear about OpenSTA from clients, but usually it's JMeter. That's the prominent one. Now, again, to reinforce something I said before, I am not listing these tools to just say, oh, don't bother going through the whole process that I described last week of determining your requirements and looking broadly at potential tools. You still need to do that. I'm just saying that one of the things that you should take into account when you're doing that is the success of the tool in the market. Now, performance testing and reliability testing have as an advantage over GUI test automation the fact that you're usually not worried about trying to build a set of tests that has to be maintained over a long period of time. Basically, one of the things that makes the tests easier to reuse and easier to build is that your oracle, the way that you're going to determine whether the test has passed or failed is a lot simpler, right? I mean, for a reliability test, as long as the system keeps responding and carrying out its basic functionality, then it's up and running, right? So you don't have a reliability problem. Very simple test oracle. For a performance test, as long as resource utilization is within a certain level with a certain number of users and the response time and or throughput is acceptable, you're not looking at complex functional things, so it's not as difficult to build the tests and to maintain them or just rebuild them if need be. Now, sometimes people make the mistake of going, well, if it's relatively simple to build these tests and they're not hard to maintain, why do I need to worry about experts for this? Certainly I can just have some sharp college students or interns or college grads and let them do it. Well, no, because you have to really understand, excuse me for one, a little interruption here, we'll get it cleared up. You have to really understand what you're doing with these tools and what the results, which can be fairly complex, are telling you. I saw a example of this with a commercial tool. This guy who had, some basic training in performance testing, but certainly not expertise in it, was going through some test results that he had gotten from using the rational performance testing tool. And he's explaining how he created a load of 100 simultaneous users and ran at that load for an hour, I think it was. And then basically what he did was a fairly common practice of, it kicks off 20 virtual users and then another 20 virtual users and another 20 and so on up to 100. And then when it comes time at the end of the hour to drop the test down, he kills 20 virtual users and then another 20 and 20, 20. So it's a step up, step down type of approach, which, that's a fairly well-known best practice in terms of doing performance testing. But so he's telling me this, and I'm looking at the graph that's showing the number of virtual users that are running, and I'm looking at the CPU load, and what happens is every time 20 virtual users start, the CPU load goes up, but what then happens is it starts to drop back down to its previous level. And once he got up to 100, it was the same thing. The CPU load had gone up and then it had gone back down to a fairly low level at 5%. And I'm looking at that going, how exactly did you loop the virtual users to make sure that they continue to put load on the system? He looked at me and said, loop? So there you go. I mean, what had happened was that the virtual users went through and did some batch of transactions and then we're done. And so each one of the virtual user sessions put about 3 or 4 minutes of load on the system and then it stopped. And just having the virtual users running is, no guarantee that they're actually doing anything. This is a fairly basic thing. I don't consider myself to be some sort of, performance test guru, but I do have enough experience with it to know some of the basics, and that's kind of a mistake I wouldn't make, but it's a mistake that's easy enough to make. So again, have expertise. Now another thing that we've seen here with the open source tools, and this is true across all the open source projects, and certainly true of open source performance testing tools, is that there were some tools out there that are no longer available. And there's also kind of this thing that happens with some of these tools, or has happened with some of these tools, where there's sort of an open sourcey kind of thing available, but then there's a commercial product which is built on it, which has more features. And that can turn out to be something of a bait and switch, because I've seen a situation with open source performance testing tools where there was a tool that was like that for a while, and then it was withdrawn. The open source was withdrawn, and if you wanted to continue using the tool, you had to go to the commercial license. So something to consider when you're looking at open source tools. Now, web services. Testing web services, what we hear here more frequently than anything else is SOAP UI. And it works. We have a number of clients using it. I've used it myself. But it can have some reliability issues. There is a commercial version of it. This is SOAP UI is one of those open sourcey kinds of things where there's a commercial version. But what I've heard from folks that have used the commercial version is it basically has very similar problems to the open source version. When I first heard about reliability issues with the open source version, I was thinking, oh, well, there's your inducement to go to the commercial version, as they put one out there that works, but it's enough of a hassle that eventually someone's going to spend the money to use the real tool. And this is not unusual. There was I wanted to convert a video from a MOV format to MP4, and there are all sorts of quote unquote free tools out there that will help you do that, and every one of them has some sort of limitation that makes it practically worthless. So this is a fairly well-known thing, but what I've heard is that the that the commercial version of SOAP UI really isn't all that much better reliability-wise than the open source version. Now, just to make sure that I wasn't missing anything, I did a little looking around on the web, and I found that there's a frequent mentions of TestMaker and Web Inject. But of all the people that I've talked to around the world, nobody has mentioned using those. But it does look like there are some options. I certainly would not say, well, if you're going to do web services testing, you're stuck using either a commercial tool like Lisa, CA's Lisa product, or SOAP UI. Again, there are usually a lot more options out there than people are aware of. So cast the net broadly when you're looking. Dynamic analysis. So dynamic analysis tools can be very useful. Trying to keep an eye on what's going on with the system while you're testing it. Of course, this is always necessary if you're doing reliability or performance testing, but it's also not a bad idea to do that while you're doing regular functional testing, just in case you stumble across some particular transaction or activity that weirds out the system in some way. Now, you've got built-in stuff in the operating system, top on Linux systems, perfmon, and Windows. Now, there's also open source stuff out there. Valgrind is one that I've got some experience with. I've used it on the Linux systems. And it also works on Android and Mac, since, of course, those are just Unix as well, right, underneath. Excuse me, a little more coffee there. WinLeak is the tool that I hear mentioned for PCs. Now, I don't have any direct experience with WinLeak. I, as I said, have used Valgrind. And Valgrind is nice. It does work well. It does have something of a learning curve on it. It's, if you don't spend some time studying it, it can produce some confusing and misleading results. And it also it has a big footprint. It uses a lot of resources. So you have to be kind of careful with that, because you have what's sometimes referred to as the probe effect. And the probe effect is where the test tool that you're using has a impact on the system such that it affects the results. And definitely, if you're using Valgrind while you're doing performance or reliability testing, you might very well end up consuming enough resources to alter the nature of your test results. Now, functional verification testing. So what I'm referring to here is our activities like acceptance test-driven development and behavior-driven development. There's quite a few tools out there. Again, this is one of those places where the Agile community has really driven a explosion of useful tools. So when people talk about doing acceptance test-driven development, or ATDD, probably what we hear from our clients most frequently is, oh yeah, we're using fitness. And for those of our clients who are doing BDD, which is less than the number doing ATDD, acceptance test-driven development seems to be more widely practiced amongst our clients than behavior-driven development. But for those of our clients that are doing BDD, what we hear typically is some form of cucumber. Now, one mistake that people sometimes make is, oh, we can't do ATDD, or we can't do BDD because we're not doing Agile. And I would say that's not really a good way of thinking about it, because while the tools were developed for the purpose of doing Agile development and Agile testing, there is no limitation. You don't have to be using an agile lifecycle to use them. Now, one thing that is important if you're going to use these tools is they should be used collaboratively between testers and developers. Excuse me for just one moment. A little dog activity in the background there was kind of distracting to me and probably to you as well. So as I was saying, when you're using these tools, they are a way of working collaboratively between developers and testers, and it seems to work best that way. Now, would it be possible to use those tools as testers, purely by yourself? Probably, but it's going to be much better if you have a collaborative relationship with the developers and work with them. What we also see commonly practiced with these functional verification tests is that there's participation of the business stakeholders reviewing the tests, and a lot of times when there's a automated smoke test in some sort of continuous integration or build framework, the tests will be included in that framework. Slide not wanting to advance here. Let's see why. What's it doing there? Apologies for the background noise. It seems that every dog and neighbor around wants to make as much noise as possible today and interfere with the webinar. So speaking of continuous integration, pretty much all of our clients that have a successful Agile implementation have some form of continuous integration in place. Now, I said in the slide here, I said present in all of our clients, and that was true when I wrote these slides a few weeks ago. But then right after that, I went and worked with a client that does a lot of work in mainframe environments, mainframe development, and they are unable to utilize the tools. So that's been a kind of source of frustration for them. Now, I said, the tools are open source, so you can get them and port them over to your mainframe environment, assuming you've got a C compiler or a C++ compiler, which of course they do. But that can be a significant investment, and there's also the intellectual property issues that are associated with that. Now, mostly what we hear about here is use of either Jenkins or Hudson as the tools that are used. Those seem to be the predominant ones, and generally those are used in combination with a number of other tools trying to do unit testing and, as I mentioned, functional verification or feature verification testing. These are not test tools per se, but they do lead to a quicker, more reliable build process. And a lot of our clients have had problems where builds are delivered to them that won't install, or they install but they're completely untestable after they were installed and so forth. And having continuous integration frameworks in place does seem to alleviate a lot of that grief. Now, that said, we have heard of situations where people set up their continuous integration frameworks and or processes in such a way that builds just get pushed into test environments without any notification to the testers. And that, of course, is disruptive to the testing activities, so that needs to be avoided. Sorry, I'm going to close one more window here. I think one of my neighbors got a memo that said that I was starting a webinar right about now, and that was exactly the time to go outside and use a leaf blower. So apologies for that. As I said, continuous integration frameworks are pretty widely used, and most of the time what we see is some extension of that to include unit testing. And generally that's some variant of what's called the X unit family of tools, so CPP unit, J unit, and so forth. Every now and then we hear of people doing honest-to-God test-driven development, which, well, by honest-to-God test-driven development, what I'm referring to here is what Kent Beck would characterize as test-driven development, where the tests are written and then the code is written. Now, we do hear about developers doing something they call test-driven development, writing the tests after they've written the code, and that's just common unit testing. And certainly, I don't have a dog in the fight. There are people that have very strong beliefs about the efficacy or lack thereof for test-driven development, but it certainly is, in my experience, more talked about than done. Now, if you're doing unit testing, which of course hopefully all developers do, one of the things that's very important in doing unit testing is to keep track of how much of the code you've tested. And we do see people out using tools like GCov, the open source coverage analysis tool, to track their coverage. But one of the things that I've found in talking to developers is a lot of them have a fairly shaky understanding of what those coverage metrics are and what they mean. So I've had a number of situations where developers could not explain to me the theoretical and practical differences between statement coverage and branch coverage. So this is a place where testers can really add value if they apply themselves here, is to learn more about unit testing, learn more about white box test design, learn more about code coverage and what different kinds of code coverage metrics mean, and work with developers to help them understand what they are and aren't getting out of their tests. Now, of course, in order to do that, this means you have to be conversant in the programming languages being used on your projects. So certainly if you're not conversant in the programming languages being used on your projects yet, I would strongly encourage you to do so, to learn that, because the trend that we're seeing very much in the United States, and also now this is starting to play out worldwide, is that Agile is becoming more and more common, and if you're going to get hired as a tester in an Agile project and you don't know the programming language or languages being used on that project, that's going to be a big hurdle for you to overcome. Now, code analysis. Static code analysis tools. We're starting to see that used frequently. Often, if there is continuous integration and there's unit testing, then some sort of static code analysis tool will get embedded into that. And the ones that we hear most often are Sonar and Splint. Though for static code analysis, this is a place where even our clients of ours that are heavily invested in open source and use open source for a lot of what they do test-wise and development-wise and configuration management-wise, will still go for a commercial static tool. Not sure what the reasoning behind that is. I haven't had a chance to really explore that heavily with clients. I'm sure there are a number of factors that lead to that. One of them probably being that the prices are perhaps more reasonable, but though some of these static code analysis tools can be quite expensive. Not only are clients using tools to do static code analysis for things like maintainability of the code and security and so forth, but also complexity. So we hear of people using this P. McCabe tool from time to time to measure the complexity of the code as a way of thinking about the maintainability of it. Now, again, if you're going to get involved with this stuff as a tester, the static code analysis tools, as a tester, you're going to need to know the programming languages that are in play. I've seen some testers kind of make fools of themselves sometimes by like looking at McCabe cyclomatic complexity and saying, oh, well, that module is horrible. That has a cyclomatic complexity of 15. And then you look at the code and you're like, well, yeah, but this is the natural way to solve this problem. And by splitting it into smaller pieces, you're going to make it more obscure, not less obscure. So, these things have to be tempered with a certain amount of judgment. Another mistake that organizations sometimes make with these static code analysis tools is going, well, we don't really need to do code reviews anymore because we're doing the static analysis. No, I mean, there are things that the static code analysis tools will tell you, but there's a lot of things that they can't, and they certainly don't have any way of knowing whether you're getting the right answer out of the code, right? Then the code could be perfectly written, well maintainable, properly commented, etc., but it's going to give the wrong answer. And there's no way that a static code analysis tool is going to be able to tell you that in most cases. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, how about for test design? So certainly, if you're going to do any sort of pairwise testing, like if you're doing configuration and compatibility testing, you'll want to get a tool for that. I mean, it's theoretically possible to find and download orthogonal arrays and use methods to deal with the problem via an orthogonal array, but it's a real pain in the butt, especially if you have any sort of constraints, or if there are certain options for particular factors that you want not to be combined and so forth. It doesn't deal well with that. Pict and Axe are two good free tools that we hear talked about. There was another one, the name escapes me at the moment. It was from Daimler Chrysler. It is still available there's a free version of it, but it's also there's a commercial thing, so it's one of these open sourcey kind of deals. Personally, I prefer the Axe tool myself. It's developed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is a branch of the U.S. government. It's free. It's pretty well supported, and it's been proven in a lot of different scenarios. There's an article out on how the Department of Defense used it. So that's certainly one to look at. Now, we hear a lot about model-based testing in sort of the buzzosphere, if you will. It's kind of one of these hot phrases lately. Go to a testing conference and you're sure to find somebody there hammering on about it. But we don't see a lot of people doing it, at least not model-based testing of functionality. Certainly there's a lot of model-based testing involved in performance and reliability testing, in the sense of building a load models and so forth. But for functional testing and using the functional model-based testing tools, that's something I think it's more talked about than done. But it is a practical thing. It's not impossible to do it. We built a model-based test system for one of our clients. If you're interested in reading about how we did it, and it's out on the either the articles page or the basic library of the RBCS website, and in an article called "Quality Goes Bananas," which if you read the article, you'll see why it's called "Quality Goes Bananas." And that was built entirely using open source tools. It was a very special case, though. So when you read that article, before you go, oh, cool, I could do this, ask yourself, do we really have an oracle available that will allow us to do what's being described here? Now, scripting tools. Scripting tools are widely used. Important part of a tester's repertoire. If you don't know how to use scripting tools, definitely, just like learning the programming language of the that's in use on your project, I would say definitely learn a scripting tool. So we hear people talk about Ruby, we hear people talk about Python. I have used TCL or Tickle and the TK library. There's the Unix shell scripts, the C shell, the Bourne shell, the Corn shell. There are a lot of different scripting languages, and this is a place where really it's sort of the embarrassment of riches issue. What we've seen with a number of clients is that somebody decides that Ruby is just the greatest scripting language ever and everything ought to be scripted in Ruby, and they go off and they create a bunch of automated tests using Ruby. Meanwhile, everybody else in the team is like, no, Ruby, we don't like Ruby. We use Python. Python is really cool. Ruby is not cool. We are cool people, therefore we are Python people. And they go off and they build a bunch of stuff in Python. And then the Ruby guy leaves, and all the Python people are like, well, we don't know how those scripts work, and we're not going to maintain the Ruby stuff, and it all has to get rewritten in Python. So if you are a manager in this situation, you really need to put your foot down and say, no, we are going to go through a careful selection process. We are going to select a scripting tool that we're going to use to do our scripting, and everybody's going to use that. And there isn't going to be any religious warfare over which of these scripting languages is the best. We're going to collectively come to a decision, and that's the way we're going to go, because otherwise you're going to end up in that situation that I mentioned. Now, you do need to have some amount of programming skill to do scripting. It's easier than using a language like C or C++ or Java, but it is still programming. Fortunately, there's a lot of great books out there on these different scripting tools, so you can very easily teach yourself or go take a class and learn how to do it. It's really not that complicated. I've taught myself the first scripting language I learned to use was a Bourne shell, and using Kernighan and Pike's book, which I think is still probably the classic on that, I taught myself how to do it in about a week. So, it's easy enough to learn. Now, these scripting languages can be used to build very large, complex, sophisticated test systems. We've done that for clients. We built a functional testing framework for a security tool once using Tickle, TCL. It was a very, very sophisticated thing. There were 4 of us working on that system for about 6 months. So it's 2 person years of effort. Just like with any sort of large programming project, though, you're going to have maintainability issues potentially. So this is a place where having somebody with experience as a lead in this effort is important. So if you're going to do something large and complex with scripting tools, make sure that you've got somebody involved as a lead or a mentor who has done that before and can warn you off some of the mistakes that can be made. Okay, so we looked at 10 areas where you can use open source tools for testing, and where testers can use them, where developers can use them, where both can use them together. There are other areas, limitations of time, of course, apply, but I think these 10 areas that I've touched on are the ones that we hear about most frequently amongst our clients, and the ones that are probably most useful, or at least most commonly used. Now, again, key point here to stress: free to download does not mean free to use, because you may not be paying licenses, you may not be paying for the tool, but people are investing their time in using the tools, and if the tool does not, in the long run, lead to an increase in productivity or effectiveness, then it's basically sapping energy. And I've seen that happen all too often with tools. People really get geeked out on them, and they're like, oh, I'm doing all those cool stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, but what's the business case? And there sometimes isn't one. And, even if you are getting some benefit out of it, you have to think about the opportunity cost. What else could be done in that same amount of time? So be careful with that. That you always want to consider, is there something else that we could be doing that might be a better use of our time? Now, that said, we do have a lot of clients out there that have had very good success with open source tools. I think that those should almost always be considered. I've been in certain situations where they were not an option for various reasons, but more often than not, organizations do have open source options available to them, and they often don't consider them just because, that the open source tools don't have marketing people, they don't have salespeople. All they have is some true believers out there that, every now and then you'll hear one giving a webinar or speaking at a conference, but they don't get the publicity that the commercial tools would have. Now, it is important, if you're going to use open source tools for whatever purpose, to think about support options, how you're going to get it supported. So, for example, with Linux, there are organizations out there that do provide commercial support for Linux, but that's not universally true. That's not something that you're going to see for all the open source tools. So, that's certainly a consideration. Also, something else worth mentioning here is the licensing. A lot of these tools are licensed through the GPL or GNU Public License, and in some cases that license will require any extensions or modifications that are made to the tool to be given back to the open source community. And that can create a problem for you if your employment agreement says that anything you create as part of your work belongs to the company. You could get into a situation where there are two entities that have a legal claim on intellectual property that you've created. And you might say, oh, well, that's lawyer stuff. I'm not going to worry about that. But I mean, trust me, I know somebody who got their hand in a wringer on that one, and it was not a good situation. So if you're going to modify or extend the open source tools, make sure you understand the licensing issues. And if the license requires that the extensions be released back to the community, make sure you have blessing from the appropriate legal people and management in your company to do that. All right, so as always, I will put the advertisement up and we will go to Q&A. Let's see. Now, Dirk says, good evening. The chat window says, welcome to Test Estimation, but this webinar is about test tools, right? Yes, apologies for that. Apparently that didn't get updated. Sorry for those who were confused by that situation. Shailendra says, hello everyone. Shailendra, this side from Delhi, India. Well, welcome to you from Delhi. Laura says, can you expand on the reliability issues with SOAP UI? We are getting ready to start using the commercial version. What I have heard people say is that when they are setting up scripts, SOAP UI scripts, that they have to be careful to save them frequently. That what can easily happen when you're setting up a test with SOAP UI is that it can just terminate in the middle of running, and any unsaved work can get lost. That's the problem that I've heard mentioned. My experience with SOAP UI has been fairly limited, so I don't have any direct experience with that happening. That's never happened to me, but I haven't done it enough. But other people who have told me, that's been an issue. So, just as in any situation here, a careful vetting and pilot process with the tool is important, Laura. Take care in how you do it. And I'd be interested in hearing from you. why you decided to go from the open source version to the commercial version. What advantages you saw that induced your company to decide to pay money? Carolina says, "Hey Rex, I cannot hear any sound in the back that you have mentioned, so not too much worrying for your audience. I'm glad to hear that. The microphone is supposed to help filter out sounds that are a certain distance away, but what I've noticed when recording sometimes is that that you will be able to hear it in the background, and I'm always worried about that being distracting to the audience and sounding somewhat unprofessional. I don't want these to sound like they were, I did the webinar in Times Square." Udion says, "How about tools like Chef and Puppet?" None of our clients have told me about Chef and Puppet. This would be something where maybe somebody could do a webinar on that, and maybe a little online demo, and I could show up and learn something about it. Always interested in learning about it. Steve says, "Hi Rex, what is pairwise testing? P.S. Siri did not know." Well, that just goes to show you, Siri, she doesn't know everything. So pairwise testing, what you're trying to do with pairwise testing is to test combinations of options across multiple factors. So let's say, for example, that you're testing a web-based application. So you've created this application that runs under browsers, and you're creating this thing on the server side, but you want to make sure that people who are accessing it are going to be able to see it. Well, there's a number of factors there that apply, right? Like, what operating system is the person using? What browser is the person using? What connection speed do they have? What security software are they running? What kinds of plugins do they have enabled in their browser, and so on, right? So you could probably identify, say, 10 factors that have options that could conceivably affect the way your application works. So you could use simple equivalence partitioning and say, I want to test every option for every factor at least once. And that's fine. That's certainly at the very least you should do. But then you have to ask yourself the question of, well, what happens if I have a particular browser on a particular operating system, and that browser on that operating system won't work with my site? Okay. So now you start talking about testing combinations. Well, now you get into trouble because let's say that there are just 10 different options for each of the 10 factors, right? Or even less. Let's say there's 4 options for each of the 10 factors. So equivalence partitioning would say I can cover that with 4 configurations, right? You have each option represented in exactly one test, so I can have 4 configurations. But what if you said, well, now I want to test all the possible combinations? Well, now you have 4 times 4 times 4 times 4, etc., 4 to the 10th power possible combinations, which is 2056 if I'm doing the math right in my head. So you're not going to do that. So somewhere between 4 test configurations and 2056 test configurations is the right number of configurations. And what pairwise testing tools allow you to do is to create a set of tests such that every possible pair of options across all possible pairs of factors is represented at least once. And in the example I just gave, where there's 4 options for each of 10 factors, that's going to tend to be around 16 tests, which is a lot better than 2056. I did a whole webinar on this, Steve, so if you want to go through and listen to that, it's called Advanced Software Testing, Pairwise, I think is the name of it, orthogonal arrays and pairwise techniques, or something along those lines. Go out to the digital library and you can listen to it, and it'll give you about an hour-long spiel on how that all works. Alan says, hello from PA. I assume that's Pennsylvania. Any tools regarding testing AngularJS? I'm assuming that's JavaScript. Not that I have heard of, but that certainly doesn't mean that they don't exist. The challenge is, as you get into environments that are less and less widespread, you're going to tend to have fewer and fewer tools, and the community supporting those tools will be smaller, and thus you're going to have more of a risk of what's called orphan tool problem. Now, the orphan tool problem is not an unsolvable problem. If you're the only person using the open source tool, then okay, as long as it's working for you and you have the technical chops to extend it in the ways that you need it and support it for yourself, then basically what you have is effectively a custom tool that somebody else built for you. So, but it is something to keep in mind is, how big is the community and how long they've been around and how committed do they look to be. Damon says, do you have any open source tool recommendations to validate technology updates, Drupal, for content in different environments, test, dev, etc.? I'm afraid that's not something that I've run into with our clients, so I don't have any. I don't have a good answer for you, Damon. Because I haven't heard of it, certainly doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that it's likely a sort of a special interest kind of area, and you're down to the possibility of the orphan tool problem I was talking about. Or the other possibility too, of course, is that this might be an up and coming thing, and that there could be a lot of people using it soon. Now, the challenge there, if you're going to go open source, is what you'll see is that these people will come up with different tools, and it won't be clear at the beginning which tool is going to attract the most usage and thus effectively the most support and be the long-term winner. And so you have, those of you old enough to remember this, the Betamax versus VHS problem, that if you decide to pick a tool in a relatively young open source tool environment, there's a possibility that that tool might go away. And that's also true in commercial tools, so something to keep in mind. Okay. So Laura's got some more input for us. She says, I don't know who made the decision to use SOAP UI commercial version. I work for a very large company, and we pay for some things, Rally, HP's ALM, Jira, etc. I was just told that we would be using SOAP UI or Ready API now. So apparently they've renamed it, or at least renamed the commercial version of it. Yeah, that can sometimes happen, that not all stakeholders and users of the tool are involved in the decision about what tools to use. So, that's kind of unfortunate because, ideally there would be broad canvassing of the stakeholders, but and certainly in large companies, not an unusual situation. Let's see, Rolf says, I believe you didn't mention test management tools. Any particular reason for that? No, mostly just constraints of time. Open source test management tools are underrepresented amongst our clients. Most of them are using some sort of commercial tool. And I'm not sure exactly why. There do seem to be some reasonably good open source tools out there. And just recently did some work on that with a client. Those of you who caught my webinar last week will remember that. And there were open source options out there. It just we don't have a lot of clients using them. Again, not sure exactly why. The big incumbents seem to have sucked a lot of oxygen out of the air there. Let's see, Diego asks, thanks for the seminar. How much relevance would you give to use code coverage tools to make a quality assessment? Or would you feel comfortable to make a quality assessment without reporting on the percentage of code covered by the testing? Okay, so I consider code coverage to be an important part of doing proper unit testing and assessing the completeness of unit testing. That certainly what I would like to see as a minimum standard for a unit test is 100% statement coverage and 100% decision coverage, with exceptions granted to that only in the rare condition that there were branches in the code that were there strictly as a sort of this should never happen kind of thing, just to make sure that there's a landing spot in the code if something completely obscure happens, some kind of condition that would be exceptionally difficult to create in a test lab. But other than that, I would say minimum should be 100% statement and decision coverage. Otherwise, you literally have untested code and untested paths in your code, and that's not okay. The first use of a particular path in the code or statement in the code should not occur in production. That's just not, to me, a good thing. Now, at the system level, assuming that you are sure that adequate code coverage has been achieved at the unit level, I'm really not so much worried about it. I mean, I would say that periodically checking that your system tests get to the important parts of the code that need system testing, that's probably worth doing. So just looking at your code coverage of your system tests. But I think if you're focused on code coverage as a primary test basis for your system tests, you're looking at the wrong things. I think you should be looking mostly at requirements or user stories. If you're in an agile environment, you should be looking at quality risks. You should be looking at supported configurations. You should be looking at user personas. I did a webinar on the dimensions of coverage, and there's really quite a few out there. You might want to take a listen to it. Code coverage to me is certainly a minor dimension when you're talking about system test or system integration test. Let's see, Jill says, for functional verification testing, do the open source tools compatible with HP ALM, that is utilizing open source for testing Agile, but ALM for defect management? I think you mean, are the open source tools compatible? We certainly have clients that are using tools like Fitness and Cucumber and so forth to do functional verification testing, and using ALM to do defect management and test management and so forth. How closely integrated those tools are with ALM, I am not sure. Usually when you have a disparate tool set, integration can be an issue. Now, the thing that tends to happen is that ALM is kind of the 800-pound gorilla, to use the cliche, and test management tools. So it is not unusual to find that there is some extension to a open source tool that will allow it to work with ALM, but I can't say specifically whether Fitness and Cucumber have those extensions built into them. That's something you'd need to check. I have a report of the audio being out from somebody, but only one person, and usually if the audio is really and truly out, then nobody would be able to hear me. And I get a lot more reports. Yeah, it says it came back. Yeah, the audio problems, as I've mentioned some previous webinars, if you lose your connection to the Citrix server, your audio will go out for a moment, and then the GoToWebinar software will try to reestablish that connection, and then it'll come back on. If I lose my connection to the Citrix server, then audio goes out for everybody. And what I see when that happens is an explosion of I lost the audio here on the Q&A panel. So in the absence of that, I usually assume that it's between one of the listeners and the Citrix server rather than between me and the Citrix server. Also, the Citrix software, the GoToWebinar software, is supposed to warn me as the presenter if there's a problem with the connection. That I get a lot of false positives out of that, though last week we did have a problem with that, where the connection on my end went down and everybody lost audio, and the thing told me that everybody had lost audio and then it came back. So it happens. Not 100% reliable and very susceptible, of course, to internet connectivity issues. It doesn't have not a whole lot of resilience built into it from what I can tell. All right, Didar, I see your question here, but since it's not relevant to the topic, I saw that you sent an email on that. I will ask that our staff respond to that email today. So you'll get an answer to your question via email today, Didar. Sorry for the delay. Now, Denise says, question about free tools and resources. Okay, but I don't see the question, Denise. I'm sorry. Could you resubmit what your question is? Let's see if we get that. I have an email question here while we're waiting for Denise's question to show up. Are free tools subject to the same kinds of failures as commercial tools? I guess that for the widely used free tools that are out there, their quality seems to be about as good as the commercial tools, though there's a wide variability if you start to include all open source tools. Of course, there can be some open source stuff out there that's not so good when it's new and it doesn't have a lot of support and it's just a few people working on the project. But the open source tools that are out there that have been out there for a while, and a lot of people have used them, seem to have matured to the point where quality is pretty good, and you can count on them. Now, the thing that you might find is, the tools are only going to have the features that the community has decided to put into them, right? And that's not based on market research or anything. That's just based on somebody wanted the tool to be able to do something, so they added it. And so the tool might not be able to do the thing that you want it to be able to do. So that is just something to keep in mind. Question from Denise here. Do you think overall that the resources need to have a programming background? Also, can you recommend using free tools for test management? Need a programming background. I would say that for most of the tools that we're talking about here, yeah, programming background is useful. Certainly, if you're going to do performance testing, you have to understand technology well enough. You have to understand the internal workings of operating systems and how the programs work. Graphical user interface automation, that's definitely at least in part a programming task. Scripting, of course, is programming. Static code analysis, unit testing, those things all would involve programming knowledge. So yeah, programming knowledge is more and more becoming important for testers, and certainly it's always been important, and it's more important than ever for people doing test automation. So yeah, I'd say pretty important. Now the question about can you recommend using free tools for test management? Well, certainly if you're going to go out and do a search for a new test management tool, I would say that you should include open source tools in your list, your long list, not your short list. You should look at them and try to evaluate them. As I mentioned, I did a webinar last week that was a case study, close case study on a particular client that we worked with to help them select test management tools. Now, in their case, they were not able to use the open source test management tools just because of some organizational constraints that made it impossible for them to do that. But in general, I would say, yes, you should look at them. As I mentioned in response to a previous question, though, we are not seeing a lot of our clients using those open source test management tools. Again, I'm not sure why, other than to say that, ALM and, the rational tool set, some of the other big incumbent commercial tools seem to have sort of sucked all the oxygen out of the air. Okay, so nice set of questions there. To close this session, a little bit more about the resources available through RBCS. These free webinars run once a month, though as you noticed, sometimes they can be separated by as little as a week, as we did the last week of June and the first week of July here, basically. But please do check our website, rbcs-us.com, to sign up for the free webinars. If you like a special webinar presentation for your company only of this webinar or on any other topic related to software testing, send us an email, info@rbcs-us.com. You can also sign up for our newsletter at rbcs-us.com. This will get you valuable discounts on consulting and training services, and a newsletter that comes out every other month has a featured article on software testing and quality and news about what RBCS and its partners are up to. You can follow us on Twitter at RBCS. On Facebook, it's RBCS-INC. Do remember to check your email over the next couple days, because you could be the lucky winner of the free e-learning drawing. But you do have to respond within, I think it's 48 hours. Otherwise, we pick someone else. These webinars are recorded and posted on our digital library on our website, along with other videos that get posted up there. So feel free to check that out. You can also do these as podcasts. The RSS feed is there on the website, or you can subscribe via iTunes. And we have videos and recorded webinars on our RBCS channel on YouTube, so check that out too. We offer these free resources as a service to the software testing community, because at RBCS we are a not just for profit company. This concludes the webinar. Thanks to everyone for joining us today.